Good afternoon. Welcome to Roberts and Jenna's Live, this time for June the 4th, in the year of our Lord 2024. So glad you could be with us today. As you know, this program is set aside for you to ask your questions, give your comments on any topic whatsoever. And I, as my role as host of this program, will endeavor to answer your questions to the best of my ability using our Catholic faith, scripture, tradition, the fathers, the medievals, the popes, the saints, the doctors, the councils, the catechisms, and just about anything I can find to help you walk away satisfied that your question has indeed been answered. We come to you every Wednesday from 3 to 5 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, barring any difficulties or schedule changes or life, how it always happens when you're least expecting it. So, all right. So today we have a lot of articles that I want to bring to your attention that I've accumulated over the week, and want to keep you up to date on what's happening out there. And as you know, this program tells the good, the bad, and the ugly. And we have a lot of ugly today, so hold on to your seats. We also have about 4 or 5 email questions. So I'll try to get to them as well. And then we will deal with, let me just deal with this question here I just saw. It says, finish the race strong. Dr. Janice, when are you uploading that vid rebutting Jimmy Akin? Very, very soon. I had to take off all the music, background music, because I had 3 complaints right in a row when I first put it up that it was distracting. So I said, okay, so I'm going to take off the background music. And then as I was going through it, there are a couple things I wanted to add here or there. And so I took that time and I've got it done. So it's just a matter of me putting it up probably tomorrow. If everything goes well, nothing gets in my way. So we'll answer that question first. So let me deal with these articles first. Okay, so remember I told you last week that Pope Francis said off the cuff in a private meeting that there were too many faggots in the Catholic seminaries. Well, he apologized for saying that to whoever was listening. May 29th, Pope comes out with an apology. Now, I'm not going to read the article here. It's 4 pages long, but I just wanted to let you know that there's a bunch of sordid stuff in here. Only ears blessed with the ability to hear this satanic stuff going on in the church. But I just wanted to let you know, I was so happy that he said, there's too many faggots in the church, and then apologizes for using that word. And somebody had said that there was a reason why he had said this. Too much faggotry in the church. What was it? Something in the news cycle had prompted him to say this. And I forget what it was. There's something that happened in Argentina at the same time where he used to be the bishop. Anyway, if I remember, I'll let you know. But I just wanted to let you know that he apologized. It didn't take long. It was like the day after, or 2 days, one or the other, and he apologized. So, Archbishop Viganò, I'm sure you've heard about him. He's been pretty popular the last couple of years. He's the guy that spilled the beans on Cardinal McCarrick and showed what a pervert he was. And he says Francis did the same abuses as Cardinal McCarrick. That's what Viganò says. So there you go. More stuff. It just never stops. And that's how this sort of lavender mafia works against each other. They all have the dirt on one another. So if you rub them the wrong way, either figuratively or literally, they'll all bring out your Pandora's box for everybody to see, and it's just the whole thing. It's just a mess. Fresno becomes the 34th U.S. diocese to file for bankruptcy amid sex abuse claims. 34 dioceses. That's just in the United States. So, declaring bankruptcy, Chapter 11, which means they'll have some kind of payment plan. So there you go. More than 450 people sue the Archdiocese of Baltimore over sexual abuse claims. So now the reason they decided to do this because somehow it was going to be closed. The opportunity to sue the Archdiocese was going to come to an end. Either that was the church's decision or the state's decision or combination of two. I'm not too sure. But now that people knew, they say, okay, well, we better go do it. Now a lot of those could be people coming out of the woodwork saying, well, here's a chance to sue the Archdiocese of Baltimore when there was no sexual abuse. There's going to be some people like that. I would assume, however, that most of the 450, considering all the sordid history that we have of the Archdiocese of Baltimore engaging in all this stuff, that the 450 is probably close to true. Okay. It might be 350. So that's still a lot. Okay. So, I just wanted to bring that to your attention. And Pope Francis, again, Pope Francis pens the preface to the pro-LGBT book of Father James Martin. I mean, see, with Pope Francis, it's like when he said there's too much faggotry in the Catholic seminaries. It's like he went up one step, but then he went back 2 steps. Usually you go up 2 steps and you go back 1. He went up 1 and went back 2. So, and then there's another article came out today. No, I'm sorry. Today is the 5th. I should have said that. I said today was the 4th in my introduction. Today is the 5th of June. The days go by so fast I can't keep track of them. This came out June 4th, yesterday, where it says priests are the sleeper cells in Rome's homosexual revolution. Sleeper cells. In other words, they're not visible. You can say there it is. They're underground, so to speak. And but the way he says homosexual revolution, okay, he calls what's happening in the Catholic Church today a revolution by the homosexuals. And that was given a a boost by fiducia supplicans. And then there was, this follows right on the heels. Lexington, Kentucky? Yeah, Lexington, Kentucky parish now offers appointments for same-sex blessings. And didn't we say this was going to happen? That they were going to systematize it and make it into a formal kind of thing, whatever way they can make it formal, Now giving an appointment to come in, that's not just some impromptu blessing. This is all planned out, and it makes the couple feel like the church is, totally behind their very sinful relationship. What a farce. This whole thing is just such a farce. And it's amazing to me that they can get away with it, But this is what God does. He allows them to go deeper and deeper into their sin. And then only He knows when He lowers the boom. And they're all dead. They're walking dead men. That's what they are. They're walking dead men. It's like, what's that TV show, The Walking Dead? That's what they are. Father Martin, Pope Francis, all these guys that are involved in this, And then there's a Father Gene Gomulka, and he was on a show, and the show was titled, "How Deep Does the Corruption Go?" And he was just giving stats here and there. And now he said something I have not yet heard. He said 80% of the cardinals in the Catholic Church are gay. 80%. That's the highest figure I have ever seen. And this guy knows what he's talking about. He says, I know all these men. I went to school with them. I ate with them. I played with them. We went on retreats together. So he knows all of them. And he was not bashful about this figure. 80% of the cardinals. It almost seems like the higher you go up the food chain in the Catholic hierarchy, the more gay they are. He said, now there's he didn't give the exact percentage, but I've heard it's 50% of the bishops are gay. He says because they hire their own, they ordain their own. If you have a conservative priest who is well qualified to be a bishop, and you have a homosexual priest who is, similarly qualified, because all you have to know is administration. Most of these guys don't act like bishops. They act like administrators. He said they're going to hire their own. They're going to hire the homosexual to come in and be bishop. And the Vatican's going to first, but all the gays at the Vatican are going to tell the Pope, well, we want this guy to be the bishop. And they don't tell the Pope, by the way, he's gay. They just don't get into that area. But if you have both of them, basically qualified for the job, the gay guy will get it. Isn't that sad? What a state of affairs we are in. And he said the bishops groom the priests that are serving under them. And basically tell them, if you don't allow homosexuality, you'll be out in some parish in Podunk, wherever that is, Indiana. Where is Podunk? I know it's somewhere. And don't ever think of being a bishop or, climbing the ladder, as they say. Not if you're a conservative. Okay. First, you have to be liberal. And then the next step up that, the next, 33rd degree is you got to be gay, okay, in today's church. So, and he says this is a fact by a study, 2018 study that was just done. Done in 2018. I forget the guy's name who did the study, but he said it is a fact that the more homosexuals you have in the priesthood, the more pedophiles you have. So there is a one-to-one correlation. Because the gays what they try to do is say there's a distinction between homosexuality and pedophilia, you see. No, there's really, the only distinction is the age. And the more homos you have, the more pedophilia. And they just like that soft flesh, I mean, they like the docility of the teenager. So they don't have to compete with adults. Let's put it that way. They like this docility. So that's why there's so much pedophilia. Okay. These guys are sick. They're really sick. And the sad part is that there's hardly any chance of rehabilitating them. They go send them off to these institutions, but that's just to get them out of the way because they've gone so far off they just don't know what to do with them. And they know they're not going to change. But it's just like kicking the can down the road. What else do you do when you don't have a solution to your problem? You just kick the can down the road and hope someday, somewhere, somehow, things are going to be different. He said the Swiss Guard at the Vatican are constantly propositioned by cardinals that are there and bishops that go in and out of there. He said he just heard so many stories. The Swiss Guard. And I can see why, if you've ever seen the Swiss Guard. Some pretty good-looking Italian men there. They're usually tall, well-built, they're young. Prime target. Yep. In the United States today, we have 65, close to 70 million Catholics. 40 million of them do not go to Mass. So that's more than 50%. Probably around 60% of them don't go to Mass. And we've heard the statistics about the Eucharist. 15%, possibly 20, 25 at the most believe that Jesus is in the Eucharist. Okay. I guess this refers to the whole world. There are 150 bishops on a list of those who have been accused of sexual sins that have been given to the Pope. Not one of them has been stopped, called to court, convicted, nothing. Not one of them. So, it tells you the state of affairs going on. Oh, and Father James Martin, May 29th, came out and said the church would be immeasurably poorer without gay priests. Poorer without gay priests. Yeah, well, when 80% of your cardinals are gay and you kick them out, so you got 20% left, 50% of the bishops, kick them out, you got half of those left. Priests, 30 to 40%, kick them out. I mean, we barely have enough priests to go around as it is. So, I didn't read here through what his reasoning is, but I'm pretty sure I can figure it out, Because if you don't have all the gay priests around, then you don't have priests and bishops to fill in the churches that are available, you see. That's why they're closing down churches left and right. And if you don't have the churches available because there's no priests or bishops available, then who's going to be giving to the donation bucket that's passed around every Sunday? Twice, usually, on a Sunday. First, and second collection. Okay? If there's no churches, who's going to be coming to the church to give you the money? Yeah, I guess we would be poorer. Thank God for that, though. Thank God for that. Yeah, that's exactly where we need to start. Right from the bottom, and we'll build a whole new church. It won't take long. You get real enthusiastic people starting over again once they know the gays are gone, and there's no telling what they can do. Okay, so glory, hallelujah for that. All right. Okay, so let me do a couple of these email questions. This won't take too long, I hope. I recently bought all 4 volumes of your commentary series, and I am looking forward to digging into them. I am a Protestant who has felt uneasy at times with standard Protestant beliefs, so consequently I've been looking at Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy over the past few years. Anyways, I had a question that I was seeking some clarification on. Is a person saved initially through the act of baptism and the faith of their parents? And if so, at what point will the baby need to have his own personal faith in Jesus Christ to continue to be saved? That's a good question. Okay, so in the Catholic Church, yes, baptism is everyone who believes and wants to come under the authority of the church. First thing you have to do is be baptized. So the catechumens come in, they learn about the church, and then after so many weeks, what we call the RCIA class, they're prepared. They know all the ins and outs about the church, except probably all the gay stuff we just covered, because they don't cover that in RCIA. Gosh. And you're baptized. And what happens at baptism? Baptism is the gift of God's grace whereby he infuses our soul with the virtues of faith, hope, and love. And thereby we are justified. Okay? And as the Council of Trent argues, since faith without works will not justify, okay? In other words, James says a man is justified by works and not by faith alone. Well, baptism takes care of that for us because it joins the works with the faith by infusing the virtues into our soul. And that's what justifies us. Okay? So we're never at a point where we just have faith alone and that justifies us. Okay? In the Catholic faith, faith, hope, and love are infused so they all work at the same time in our soul, and thereby we are not lacking the works. The works have been joined with the faith, and thereby we are justified. Okay? So that issue between Paul and James is taken care of in baptism. There is no controversy. Like, well, Paul says we're justified by faith and not by works. Why does James say, we're justified by works and not by faith alone? Well, there's big controversy about that. Okay, especially in the Protestant world. But in the Catholic world, there is no controversy. Why? Because faith and works, or faith and love, are joined together in the infusion into the soul by the power of the sacrament of baptism. Okay? So that's where your salvation or justification comes from. Now, it gets a little confusing. Well, let me just first elaborate on that. So you receive your dose of faith and love and hope in baptism, okay? But does that mean you're going to be saved? No. Okay? Once you receive that gift of faith, hope, and love in baptism, then you have to continue in faith, hope, and love. Okay? From the day you're baptized until the end of your life, you have to continue to practice those virtues. You have the grace to do it because that's what you got when you were baptized. Okay? But now you have to put your will into effect and actually act them out. Act out the faith. Act out the hope. Act out the love. Okay? So there are going to be times in your life, for example, where you're going to question the existence of God because things aren't going the way you planned them out. Okay? And life can be that way. And so what are you going to do? You're going to say, well, obviously God can't exist because if there was a God, he wouldn't put me through this. And, you have no faith now. Or let's say that you've had plenty of opportunities to help the poor, take care of the sick, clothe the naked, all that kind of stuff, and you've refused every time. Okay. Well, you're not putting the virtue of love into practice that you received at baptism. Okay. So if you're not doing these things, putting them into practice, then you're not going to be saved. Okay. So just because you received them at baptism does not mean that hey, that's it. It's over. No, you got to continue every day until the day you die. And as Jesus says, he who endures to the end will be saved. Okay. So sometimes it might be faith that you struggle with and you got to endure. Sometimes it might be works that you should be helping people, but you're not. You got to struggle with that. Okay. So that's going to happen throughout our life. Okay. And what the Council of Trent said in how we described this part of our life, where after baptism, we now have the responsibility to apply what we've received in baptism, that is faith and works. What is the Council of Trent call that? It says that's the way we increase our justification before God. So that word is pretty big because what that means is it's not another justification that we have, because it may look that way in the book of James. A man is justified by works also and not by faith alone. Trent says it's the increase of the previous justification. Okay, so when did the previous justification come? That came at baptism. On that baptism, that one baptism, we then increase that baptism. Let's say it's a graph, so to speak. You're increasing the production over the cost and your graph goes up. Well, that's more or less the way it is in Catholicism. Okay, you're increasing the justification. How is that in practical terms? Well, You become closer to God. You love God more. You do more works for your neighbor. You pray more. You just are close to God. Okay? He's actually not just a being to fear out there. He actually becomes a friend as you increase in your justification. Okay? Now, are you saved? No, not yet, because you have to endure to the end. Okay? So you can keep increasing in justification, and as you increase in justification, the greater your odds are of not falling away, because that happens to a lot of Catholics. What about all the 40 million Catholics in the U.S. who don't even go to Mass, giving God the finger, basically? Okay? I mean, it's one thing, to skip the sacraments, but you're not even going to Mass to pray? So 40 million of them have fallen away. And they're not increasing their justification. They've lost their justification. And the only way that they're going to be able to get it back, restore that initial justification, is by going to the sacrament of confession. That's why it's there. Because it was originally designed for mortal sins that automatically excommunicated you from the church. Okay? So you can keep increasing, and then all of a sudden you fall away, and there goes all that increase. Okay? You're on your way to judgment. Okay? So then, let's say you do keep increasing in justification, and you die, and then you stand before God's judgment, and He determines whether you have to go to purgatory or not. And if not, then you go immediately into heaven. Okay, so now you ask here, and if so, at what point will the baby need to have his own personal faith in Jesus Christ to continue to be saved? Well, that is answered by the fact that the church holds that a child of 7 years old is accountable for his sins. Okay? His what we would call active sins, not original sin. Original sin is taken away in baptism for that infant. But then when he reaches the age of 7, he is now conscious of his own morality, and he's conscious of death. He's conscious of God enough where this is the line that the church draws and says this is where it starts. Okay? And that is not an arbitrary number. That is a number that the church has held for all of its existence, as far as I understand. So that's when he is responsible to have his personal faith in Jesus at 7 years old. Okay? And I know some 7-year-olds who have actually done that. They've actually made a commitment to Jesus, and at 7, and they still have it today. Okay. And then comes the time where the child is no longer a child. He has come of age where he is even more mature and entering adulthood. Not yet, but he's opening the door, walking down the hallway to adulthood. Okay, wherein he is going to confront many adult-like situations that he did not confront when he was a child of 7 years old. Okay, so this is the difference between 0 to 12 and say 13 to 19. A teenager's life is far different than a child's life. He is going to be bombarded by all kinds of temptations, peer pressure, scheduling, treating people with kindness, whereas, you could throw something at them when you're a kid and everybody laughs at you. Well, that ain't going to be true any longer. You throw something at somebody and you're going to have a fight on your hands. Okay, and they learn this. And so that's a different area you're entering into. So the church says at this time, the sacrament of confirmation, where you become what they say is a soldier of Christ. Soldier meaning you're going to fight the battle now. You're going to fight the battle against, illicit sex, alcohol, drugs, dishonoring your parents, whatever. You're going to fight that battle with everybody else now. Okay. And here's a special grace of God that you can have in order to do that. That's called confirmation. And in my Bible commentary, I show you where confirmation comes from in the church from Scripture, so you can verify it at all, in your copies that you have. And now here's the thing. Confirmation works the same as baptism. You receive the graces, but they will be latent after you've been forgiven of original sin. Those graces are going to be latent in you until you use them. Okay? And this is why you see a lot of Catholic kids go to confirmation and they come out the same way they went in. It didn't affect them. It doesn't mean the sacrament is invalid. The grace of the sacrament is there. But they, because God gave us a free will, have to tap into it. And the tapping into it is just not tapping it. Okay, you're going to have to work hard to prepare yourself to face the world by learning, the catechism, the commentaries, praying, showing God that you really are interested in his kingdom, and then this world is nothing. Okay, continuing on that, and then the graces of the confirmation come to the fore, and they will make you into something you had no concept of before. This is where the saints get their verve from, okay? Because they're using the graces of the confirmation that they had, that were waiting to be tapped into, okay? So that's what this baby's going to go through. And I think I answered your question. So let me go on to the next one. Could you explain in layman's terms what is quantum mechanics and string theory? Is this a real observable by our five senses? Anything to do with geocentrism? Okay. Well, I'll try to be brief and simple because I could go on about this for 3 hours. But you have, they discovered, who was it? John Dalton discovered the atom. What was it? 1800s, I think. Yeah. And from that, we built the periodic table, right? So we have hydrogen on the left top, we have helium on the right top, and then we have all the elements that are similar, but they have more electrons, protons, and neutrons. They all come in families, these elements. That's why they're put in the periodic table. So we know that hydrogen has one electron, one proton. Okay, now you could have heavy hydrogen, but it's unstable. Helium is very stable, 2 protons, 2 electrons, and a neutron. So it's very stable, inert gas. So this is how you build the periodic table, is by putting more protons and neutrons into the nucleus, and then matching that with electrons that somehow are not motionless. They are in motion. We don't know exactly how they're in motion, whether it's just a big cloud of electrons or we actually do have electrons in rings, going around the nucleus. So here you have the beginnings of chemistry, physics, knowing the basic constituents of matter. Okay. Now we know that it works because, if you have an oxygen atom, I think it's number 16 on the periodic table, its outer ring. Okay, its outer ring, it has several rings where electrons go around the rings. On the outer ring, it's missing 2 electrons because you need 8 electrons to make it stable. So it only has 6. And I'm doing this all by memory. Okay, if I get one or number wrong, don't get alarmed. So it needs 2 more electrons to make it stable. Okay, and guess what? Hydrogen each atom has 1 electron. So they're going to fit right on top of that oxygen atom and give it the 2 electrons it needs to be stable in its outer orbit. Okay. So, and guess what that makes? Water. That's why you see so much of it, because it's stable. Now you could have heavy water, okay, but that's unstable because it's trying to get rid of that electron when you're trying to put it back on there somehow. Okay. So that's how the atoms build different elements and build compounds of those elements. It's really gold is gold because it has a certain amount of electrons and protons, and matched by the electrons that are going around that nucleus. Okay. But if you add just 1 more electron, you turn it into mercury. Okay. That's how God put it all together. It's not like, mercury is so different than gold. It's just, and I think that, the Ag is right next to mercury there in the periodic table, if I remember correctly. But you just add 1 more electron and proton and you got mercury, which is a totally different kind of substance. Okay. So it's just a matter of you keep building the protons and neutrons into more protons and neutrons, but somewhere along the line, you're going to reach a point where you really can't add any more protons and neutrons. And you really can't add any more electrons. And if you do, you're going to have an unstable element, and it's not going to last very long. Okay. Now there are we have 92 natural elements, and they're the ones that are stable. Uranium, I think, is the last one where you have as many protons and neutrons as possible and still remain in the stable area. Okay. If you go past that, which they have done, okay, because they jam it up with protons or neutrons to see if they will stick. And some stick for a few seconds, some stick for microseconds, but they don't stick very long. And they're very unstable. Okay. So, and that's what they want to do with polonium. They want to make it unstable. So it's perfect for an atomic bomb. Okay. All you have to do is hit it the wrong way at the wrong time, and poof, that thing goes up because it's unstable to begin with. Okay. That's what makes explosions, when you have chemical elements that are unstable. So, we have 113 total. So I don't know. It's like a couple dozen very unstable man-made elements. Okay. Because man makes them because they're unstable in nature, and nature won't make them. Okay. See, now why I'm going through all this is what? This is what we know. This is what we have measured. We've done tons of experiments to verify it. This is what we know. Okay, but that's just on the atomic level. Okay, so what's in the electron? What's in the proton? What's in the neutron? What are they, by the way? Okay, And when we talk about them going around the nucleus and all that, yeah, that's all fine, and it seems to work. But what about inside? Inside the electron and the protons and neutrons, well, then you got all kinds of theories now. Quarks, leptons, this, that, and the other thing. I think there's like 9 different objects. Okay. And what's the function of each of them? I mean, why is it this way? And then you get down even further, okay, where we had a guy, forget what's his name. He did an experiment where he shot beta particles, that's helium atoms, into a foil of gold that was very, 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 very thin. They got it down. That's one thing you could do with gold is you could keep cutting it and cutting it and cutting it, and it doesn't fall apart. It just divides. So, but it has the point of no return where you can't do it anymore, but you can get a very thin piece of gold. And he shot beta particles through that gold foil, and what happened was some would go right through and hit the target on the other side of it, and some would veer off 90 degrees. Okay, so what did that mean? Well, that meant that he would sometimes hit the nucleus of the gold atom, and sometimes he would hit the space between the nucleus and the electron, and it would go right through the atom without being stopped by anything. Okay, so the question is, what is between the nucleus of the atom, okay, and the electron that's going around it? Well, it turns out that that's 99% of the atom. Okay, that space between the nucleus and the electron, let's say you have a hydrogen atom, it has 1 proton and 1 electron. That space between them composes 99% of the atom. Okay, so now is that just space, or is that filled with something? Well, the beta particles went through it, so it looks like there's nothing there. But that's not true. There's a whole world there that your senses can't see. Now, our senses could hardly see the electron. You have an electron microscope. They have shown electrons tied to atoms, so we see them. Okay, and I've seen them. So, but that's as far down as we can go, because the wavelength of light will only take you so far. And there's a whole other world there that's way beyond the electron in smallness. The electron is what, 10 to the minus 15th meters? Well, this space that they're talking about between the nucleus and the electron is at 10 to the minus 35 meters. Okay? That's 20 orders of magnitude smaller than the electron, which is already small. So you can see there's a whole other universe in there. Okay? And that's what quantum mechanics goes into discover. What is that space? What's it composed of? How does it react? What does it do? And all that kind of stuff. And when they go in there with the limited abilities that they have to try to find out what's going on, there's all kinds of crazy things going on. Okay? That you don't get at the atomic level. So, in other words, what quantum mechanics does, it goes into this quantum world and tries to find out what's going on beneath the atomic world. Okay. They know it's there because they've done experiments to show that it is there. Okay. And, but you can't see it, you can't smell it, can't touch it, no matter what instruments you use. So it's theory, but it's theory that is based on facts. Okay. And whether those theories are going to turn out to be all right or need to be adjusted, future science will tell us. But that's what quantum mechanics does. It goes into the smallest parts of nature to try to figure out what it's composed of, what it's doing, how it reacts. Does it have an electrical charge? How much mass does it have? Does it have pressure? Does it have temperature? You know, um, all that stuff. It needs to know. And they've done some pretty good work on that. Okay, so that's what it is. String theory tries to combine, it's one of the theories of combining the quantum world with the atomic world, is basically what it's trying to do. And it says that the components of the quantum world that I had said is between the nucleus and the electron, they're made of little strings. And, trillions upon trillions upon trillions of them compacted into the hydrogen atom. Okay. And the way these strings operate will turn it into a hydrogen atom or a helium atom or a sulfur atom or a gold atom. However, those strings vibrate, they move. Okay. So it's trying to explain the connection between the quantum world and the atomic world. String theory does. It's had its difficulties because it doesn't deal in three-dimensional Euclidean geometry. Okay, in order to make this connection between the quantum world and the atomic world, you have to have at least 10 dimensions. And then you have superstring theory, which has 11 dimensions. So when you get out that far into dimensions, you're in the land of make-believe now, okay? Because we don't know what that means, 10 or 11. Mathematically, they try to make it work out, but whether it actually can work out physically or not, that's to be decided. But that's basically what they're trying to do. They're trying to connect the quantum world with the atomic world. And once they do that, then they can know what the purpose is of this quantum world, And as I've always said, there's no nothing, because nothing by definition doesn't exist. Nothing, you can't say, well, the outer space is nothing. No, it's a something, okay? Because if it was a nothing, that means the moon and the earth would be coalescing, okay? If there's nothing separating them, then they coalesce. So in order for them to be separated, there has to be something there. And what is that something? Going beyond the atomic level. You could say, there's electron, positron dipoles out there. You could say that there's cosmic rays. You could say there's neutrinos. There's a lot of things out there in space, but getting down to the basic level, okay, that you can't go down any further, that's probably the best way to say it. What is it that holds this universe together at the fundamental level that you can't go down any further? Okay, that's the quest of quantum mechanics. Okay, all right, let's see. Well, I spent an hour on these. So I'll have to hold off these questions until later, and I'm going to go to our little chat board here. Sorry to keep you waiting so long. All right. Catholics speaking in tongues. Well, I have a friend who's writing a nice book on it. I've written a book on it. You can get it at robertsongenis.org. It's titled Tongues, Sign of Judgment, Sign of Blessing, Sign of Judgment. Okay. I wrote that many years ago, and it's still true today. And yeah, basically most of the tongues that you see are made up by people. Okay. And it's very easy to train your mind to do that. As a matter of fact, at some of these charismatic churches, if you want to join in the tongue speaking that everybody else is doing, they can take you back and show you how to have your mind dissociate from your tongue and you produce this babble. And for some reason, it makes them feel better. Okay. Now I've done psychological studies, biblical studies on this phenomena, historical studies, and they're all in my book. And if you're interested, I suggest you get the book because it'll give you an education. Okay. And, it was started by the Protestants, revived, I should say, by the Protestants in 1901 by, what's her name, Agnes of the Pentecostal Church. Okay, so that'll give you some hint as to who the people are behind it that reintroduced it, because it had been basically dead for many, many years. There were a couple of Catholic saints who claimed to have used it when they went to foreign countries, didn't know the language, but all of a sudden they could speak the language of the people that they were trying to evangelize. And that makes sense, okay? Because even though Scripture says that tongues will cease, it doesn't say that they will stop altogether, okay? So in that sense, there could be occasions where God would give the gift again, but he's not going to give it like he gave it at the Church of Corinth. And these were the very people Paul told that tongues is going to cease. First Corinthians chapter 13, verse 8 says, prophecy prophecy and knowledge will continue until we meet him face to face, and that's the second coming of Christ. But tongues shall cease. So it separates the tongues from the knowledge and prophecy. And the tongues, if the prophecy and knowledge are going to cease at the second coming of Christ, that means tongues is going to cease before that, because tongues is not included in that category of being applicable until the coming of Christ. The tongues will cease. So the next question is, well, when did it cease? Well, if you look at all the fathers of the church, they'll tell you that it ceased after the first century. It just wasn't heard of anymore. Nobody was speaking in tongues in the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth century onward. The only exceptions are these saints in the medieval period. And there's just a couple of them, okay? And they're in my book, who needed to speak the language of the people, okay? So, and Paul in 1 Corinthians 14, verse 39 says, do not prohibit the speaking of tongues, okay? So, on the one hand, tongues will cease, but for the time being, don't prohibit the speaking of tongues. And why would he have to say that? Well, because in the Corinthian church, they were having problems with the gift of tongues. Several problems. They had people sort of speaking their own mind. And Paul says, you can't do that. The rules are you can't do that unless you have an interpreter who is given the gift of interpretation present in the congregation. So, in other words, someone just couldn't stand up and start blurting out tongue speech that he learned at home, because we would know he's a fake because there's no interpreter there to interpret the message for the people. They just wanted the sensationalism of appearing like God blessed them and they could speak in this language that nobody knew, and that made them special. So Paul, saw this as a road to pride. This is exactly what we don't want in the church. Somebody assuming that they're better than somebody else because God's given them this gift. Okay? And then not only were you getting people doing that, you were getting people, 2 or 3 people standing up at the same time. And that just added more confusion to the whole thing. And so Paul says, and if you have a tongue that you find an interpreter for, you're only to speak one at a time. Okay? So, I mean, it almost got to the point where he had to treat them like babies. As a matter of fact, he used that analogy there. He goes, when I was a child, I spoke as a child. When I became a man, I spoke as a man. And he's implying there, stop speaking in baby talk. It's not going to help anybody. And you sound weird. And then he gives the example of the man who's outside of the church and he sticks his head in to hear what's going on, and he hears these people going, and he says to himself, and Paul is saying this, he says to himself, these people are crazy. And he walks on. But if you're in there and he peeks his head in and you're preaching the gospel and he's convicted in his heart, what's he going to do? He's going to come in and join you. Okay? So stop speaking baby talk and thinking that somehow this is going to make you holier. No, it's not going to make you holier. It's going to put you under the judgment of God for lying, pretending you have the gift when you don't. Okay? And that's what 100% of the tongues going on today is. People making it up. And it's easy to do, as I said. Okay? And then he gives this very ominous warning in 1 Corinthians 14, 21 and 22. He says, have you heard where it said, I will speak to them in other tongues? And so the invitation there is to go back in the Old Testament to find out where he's talking about. And this is Paul writing to the Corinthians. And the chapter he's talking about, I think, is Isaiah 22. And that's just one of the chapters. And then there's allusions to Deuteronomy 28 and Jeremiah 5, where the same foreign languages are appearing. Okay, so Paul wants them to go back in the Old Testament and read about these instances of people coming into the congregation and speaking in other languages. Okay, and when you go back to Isaiah 22, or is it, no, Isaiah 28, I'm sorry, Isaiah 28, you find out that it's the time of Israel's judgment for their apostasy. And the foreign tongues that God is bringing to them are the Babylonians, who are going to take them into captivity. Okay? And you go read about it in Isaiah 28, and it says, I will bring a nation of foreign tongues against you. And that's the passage that Paul says, you want to start playing around with tongues in the Corinthian church and make it sound like God's blessing us when, in fact, we're probably under his judgment? Here, go read this passage back in Isaiah 28, where it talks about foreign tongues coming into the church. Well, that's exactly what's happening here. Foreign tongues are coming into the church. And what did it mean for Israel? They were under God's judgment. What does it mean for you? Yeah, you're probably under God's judgment too. Because there shouldn't be any false tongues here. I already gave you the rules. And some of you think you're so special that you start speaking this jibber jab and you get everybody, all excited about it. And it's just taking them further away from God. Because the real way to get close to God is prophecy and knowledge, not jibber jabber. Okay? So, and then you can go back to Jeremiah 5 and Jeremiah 28. You'll see the same thing. In all three passages, God talks about the sign of his judgment being foreign tongues coming into the congregation. So that's why the title of my book is Tongues, Sign of Blessing, Sign of Judgment. Can go either way. When tongues are legitimate, it's a sign of blessing, as it was at Pentecost. When you have the 12 apostles, Matthew or Matthias has joined them since then, and they're all speaking a different language. Okay, and you got 14 nations there. Jews, all of them Jews coming from 14 different nations. And they hear the apostles speaking in their own language from each nation. Now, some of the nations probably spoke, 2 or 3 of them probably spoke Greek. So that's why you got 12 apostles and 14 nations. But the point is there, tongues was a blessing. Okay. And then in Acts chapter 16, or Acts chapter 10 and 11, when Cornelius starts speaking in tongues, he's the first Gentile convert. Okay. And so that associates him with Pentecost, and it shows the Jews that, hey, the Gentiles are now going to be part of the church, not just Jews. And to prove it to Peter, God allows Cornelius to speak in tongues, which is the same gift the apostles had. So that means they're on the same level. Okay. And then you have the same thing happen again in Acts 19 with the Ephesians. They speak in tongues. So that's when tongues was a blessing, because it was being used properly to evangelize, to build the church, to show the transition from the Old to the New Testament. All that's legit. Okay. And then you have the Corinthian church that comes along, and these people were wacky to begin with, coming from worship of idols and all kinds of, it was a big thriving city, like New York City. You get all kinds of people, all kinds of vocations, all kinds of weird things going on. That's what Corinth was. It was a metropolis of the Greek area. So you get all kinds of people, and they're coming in, and they haven't left the baggage that they came from. And, all these cults used to speak in tongues. They used to call it glossolalia, where you could go into an ecstasy, put your mind into an ecstasy, disassociate your normal faculties from your vocal cords, and they would come out with all kinds of weird talk. Okay. So glossolalia predated the tongues of the New Testament, going back 3 centuries BC. And these cults used to practice it. And I guess some of these Corinthians who were engaged in that, when they were invited into the church and came in, they started thinking, well, here's Paul's talking about tongues, but, we had this glossolalia when we were practicing the cults of Corinth, and, maybe that works the same way. And so, I induced it myself when I was speaking glossolalia, and now, hey, maybe that's the same way you do it in Corinth, and that'll make me holy, being a new Christian. So all those kinds of ideas were swirling around in the Corinthian church. So, and who put a stop to them? Well, it was Paul. He gave them rules. And most of them, guess what? Most of these cultish Corinthians who came into the church at Corinth, there's only one church, one Catholic church, were women. Most women were in these cults in Greece, in Corinth. Okay. And so you get a lot of women standing up during the Mass at the Corinthian congregation, Catholic congregation, starting to speak in tongues, making it up like they did with the glossolalia, that they did when they were practicing cultists. And so that's why Paul comes in and says, and by the way, women should keep silent in the churches. And who's he directing that to? Well, he's directing it to these women who were speaking in tongues. So they thought. Okay, so let's put it this way. You're supposed to have one person at a time, and he's got to make sure there's an interpreter there. And if there's more than one person, then you have to take turns. Okay, and each of you has to have an interpreter. And I'm only talking to the men, okay, not the women. As for the women, they shouldn't even be speaking in church, much less speaking in tongues. And if you don't believe me, well, go back and read the law, because that's where it comes from. Because so Paul gives his witnesses. He says, this is not my opinion. This is coming from the law, that a woman is to be submissive. And that, therefore, she's not to be speaking in the congregation at all, much less speaking in tongues. Okay? He goes so far as to say, and if you have something to say, let's say you have a question you want to ask your husband, which seems innocuous, right? Like, hey, dear, what did that mean, what he just said? Paul says, don't even do that. Wait till you get home and then ask your husband. Okay? So you can see the rules that were laid down. And Paul said, I got this from the law, and God himself told me. Right in the context there, verses 36, 37. And if you disagree with me, you women, well, who made you a prophet? In verse 38, he says that. Who made you a prophet that you're going to tell us now how the church is going to be run? And obviously they're not going to be able to say, okay? Because they'll just be engaging in another lie, that somehow God made them a prophet and they can speak in tongues in the church. Okay? So, and then verse 39 says, but by the way, don't forbid the speaking in tongues. After all that soliloquy about what's going to happen to you and how you have to play by the rules, don't stop him if you have a legitimate gift of tongues, which is pretty good. Okay. So there you have it. Let's go on to question. Do miracles, exorcisms, and apparitions from the public and private revelation prove the Catholic faith? What do we say about Marian apparitions to the Coptic Orthodox in Egypt? I don't know about any legit Marian apparitions. I mean, how would you know they're legit Marian apparitions in the Orthodox Church when the Catholic Church is the only one who claims authority to decide the validity of a Marian apparition? I mean, we've had plenty of claims of Marian apparitions in the Catholic Church that the church has said, no, that's false. Okay? Very few of them does the church say that's legit. Okay? Like Montagori, for example. Church has never said that it's legit. It's a farce, the whole thing. That's just in the Catholic Church. Okay? So, Orthodox, the first question that would come to the surface is, how do we know it's legit? It could be the devil coming. Who was it that said, stop coming to me, Mary, because I can't tell the difference between you and the devil? It was who was that? Was that Padre Pio? Might have been Padre Pio. Yeah, okay, so that's the first answer. The second is miracles, exorcisms, apparitions don't prove the Catholic faith. They give evidence of the Catholic faith. Okay, that's why we still live by faith. Because if you had proof, you wouldn't need faith. And what is proof? Proof is actually seeing it. Okay, as Hebrews 11 verse 1 defines faith, it says, believing in what you can't see. Okay, that's what faith is. And when we see, we're no longer going to need faith. That's why faith and hope they're gifts that will vanish away. And the only one left is love. That's what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 13 when he's talking about tongues. Okay, we have faith now, we have hope now, but they're going to be gone. Because when you see, you have proof. So that's the only way you would have proof about the Catholic faith. Otherwise, it's all by faith, right? Okay, now God gives us little hints here and there by miracles, exorcisms, apparitions, but they don't prove the Catholic faith. They just give us evidence. Okay, and like, a court of law will say, hey, you got enough evidence? We don't know for sure whether you killed her, John, but we're pretty sure by all this evidence that we can convict you. Okay, so, all right. Okay, I already answered the question about when I'm uploading the video, probably tomorrow or the next day. That's the video rebutting James Akin's debate with James White on justification. Okay. Is the Trinity taught or symbolized in the Old Testament? Some people say the three angels who spoke to Abraham are the three members of the Trinity. Well, we don't know for sure whether that's the case, because usually God will use angels to be his companions in situations like that. Okay. And to assume that the three angels were, or the three men were, represent the Trinity, that's saying that you can represent the Trinity as a three and not a one. Okay, so there's a little theological issue there. Not that the Trinity is not three, but it's three in one and one in three. Now that's the mystery, but that's the identity of the Trinity. So God is not you. If you're representing God, you might be off theologically if you just use three people and you say, well, that represents the Trinity. It's just a little bit more than that. Okay, maybe a lot more than that. Okay, because we're talking about oneness of God and threeness without being three gods. Now, that's a hard concept to understand, but so you have to be careful. But usually, there is never another time that I know of in the Old Testament where God comes in the Trinity and that's represented by three men. I don't know of any place that does that. Okay. So there is no precedence for saying that Genesis 18 and 19 are talking about or are saying that the three men are the Trinity. Okay. But if God wanted to do that, that's fine. He just has no indication in the text that it's the Trinity. Okay. Because you're going to get in all kinds of problems. Because Christ has not been incarnated yet. The Holy Spirit is never pictured with a form. Okay. Just as like a wind or something of that nature. So to make him into a man, you might be going too far there. So, you really got to be careful. And the other thing would be like when in Exodus 33, Moses wants to get close to God, and God had come down in the Shekinah glory cloud into the tent, and the tent lit up, and Abraham communed with God there. But so when that is done, and they both come out of the tent, Moses propositions God, says, I want to know more. I want to see you for who you are. Okay. And so God says, okay, I'll let you see me. But I can't let you see all of me. I'll let you see my back parts. Okay. Now, this is a very interesting passage. Here you have the eternal God who says he is invisible, and I'm not saying he says in the sense I'm doubting it. He is invisible, but because we worship him in spirit without seeing him, okay? And as far as we know, occupies every square inch of the universe in the sense that either he knows about it and is conscious of it or is there. Like our catechism says, God is everywhere. Okay. And yet, here we have an instance where he's going to localize his presence to Moses, to show Moses more of him, because that's what Moses asked for. I'm tired of the Shekinah glory cloud. I'm tired of the pillar of fire. I'm tired of, all these little things that you're teasing me with. I want to see you. That's a pretty bold statement from Moses. But, here he goes up to get the commandments from God. He's gone for 40 days and 40 nights. Who knows what went on up there between God and Moses? Why did it take 40 days and 40 nights? What is God showing Moses? What kind of relationship is going on here? I mean, he could have gone up, a couple days, got the commandments, walked down a couple days. 4, 5, 6 days at the most. But he's up there 40. Well, that number 40 has significance because God is testing the Israelites, and the number 40 is always used for testing. But so, in other words, what I'm trying to say is God's putting a big burden on Moses. He wants him to lead them out of Exodus, out of Egypt, which he did. And then they come into the desert, and everybody's complaining. Things are going haywire, and Moses gets the brunt of the issue, and everybody's pointing the finger at him. And this is why God says in Exodus 33, the same chapter, at the beginning of the chapter, and this is interesting because you got God saying one thing, and then he totally turns around when Moses asks him to show himself. God, in the first 5 verses of Exodus 33, tells Moses, right after Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt, he says, I've decided not to go with you through the desert to the land of Canaan, because if I go, I may destroy them all. Whoa. Okay. This is the kind of God we're dealing with. I'm not going to go because I might destroy you. That's like something my parents would tell me. But it's real. This is the God we have. He is so beside himself with anger over what the Israelites did in worshiping that golden calf that he decides he doesn't want to go with them in the desert. Because he wants them to get to the promised land. He promised Abraham that they would have it. But if he goes, he might destroy them because of their wickedness that he knows is going to happen. Okay. Just on a pure man level, he knows it's going to happen because that's the kind of people they are. They were already mumbling in Egypt when they lived in the land of Goshen, the best land that Egypt had. They were already mumbling or murmuring against God. Okay, so he knew what kind of people they were from the beginning. Hard-nosed, stiff-necked people. That's what he calls them. Okay, so you got that in Exodus 1-5, Exodus 33, 1-5. And then Moses has the audacity to ask God, not only did Moses convince God to come, because God says, I'm not coming, and Moses says, please come, and God says, all right, I'll come for you. Okay, so you see what kind of relationship they had. I mean, this is just remarkable. And then Moses says, all right, You know what? If I'm going to take on all this responsibility, lead these people out to the desert, and you yourself weren't going to go, and you were going to leave it all on me. Okay. In return, I want to see all of you. I want to see you. I want to get real close to you. I want to see the reward for what I'm doing, leading these people out to the land of Canaan so you can fulfill your promise to Abraham. Okay? I want to see something. Enough of this pitter patter. And so God says, okay, I will. And when he shows himself, he shows the back parts. He puts Moses in the cleft of the mountain. God goes by so that Moses can only see but God's back parts. So he's got back parts. You must have front parts and side parts. Also, that's what's implied in that. Okay. There's some object that is visible, but we only see one. We don't see a trinity. We don't see three people going past Moses. We only see one. Okay. And then we know that's God. Okay. That's the oneness of God. And God's portraying it to us, and it's real. This is not, as you will sometimes read in some comment, well, this is just an anthropomorphism that the writer made up because God really can't do that. No, God can do that. Okay. And God did it. Okay. So you can have a form, and it's not going to be some amorphous thing that is not God, because that would be a lie. If God put some form there and pretended that it was him and had it pass by Moses so he could see the back parts, and it wasn't really God, that would be a lie. And God can't lie. Okay, so this is real. As real as the three people that came to Abraham in Genesis 18 and 19. Okay. So there, I say all that because you don't want to confuse the images and say something theologically incorrect if you say that they were, the Trinity, and when they met Abraham, the three men met Abraham. All right. Question: who are your top 5 Catholic modern authors? I don't read any of them, so I'm sorry. I just don't read any of them. I don't have time. I just don't have time. Every once in a while, I'll pick up a book because it was right, but he's not my favorite author. It's because the topic that I am interested in, he's one of the authors that wrote about it. And that's the only thing. So I don't have any favorites like, I'm going to read Scott Hahn. So, New Apostolic Restoration thoughts. Not sure what you're referring to there, Laura. Do Catholics speak in tongues? Well, they think they speak in tongues. Okay. I mean, in my book, if you get my book, and I highly recommend that you do. Okay. It's at robertsongenis.org. Tongues, sign of blessing, sign of judgment. And I go through the history in the 20th century where tongues suddenly started up again in the Catholic Church. And it's all the liberal cardinals. What's it? Susan, Cardinal, what's his name? Something starts with an S. Leading all these Catholic people at Notre Dame in the 1960s to speak in tongues. Okay? Because look, things are bad in the Catholic Church already. You had the liberals come out in the 40s and 50s, 60s, and the church is dying on the vine. Okay? I mean, you have tons of people leaving the church, going to Protestant denominations. The Protestants Pentecostal churches, Assemblies of God, they speak in tongues, by the way. Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons. These are the fastest growing Protestant denominations in the country. And 80% of them are composed of ex-Catholics. The church is bleeding. It's hemorrhaging at this point. One of the reasons why is the reaction against Vatican II and the taking the Novus Ordo Mass. Okay, you've had Catholics, look, man, they live decades after decades with the old ways, and all of a sudden you pull the rug out from under them, and how do you think they're going to react? You think it's just a matter, oh yeah, whatever the church says, I know what the church is. I've been living at it for 50 years. And these people they just reacted wrongly, and so you had a major exodus from the Catholic Church in the 60s and 70s, and to get back the fervor, so to speak. A lot of the cardinals were recommending this gift of tongues that the Protestants had, because, as I said, the first Protestant to start the gift of tongues all over again was Agnes. I still forget her name. Something Head, not Moorhead or something like that. Something like that. Anyway, so you had all these Pentecostal churches and holiness churches left over from the late 1800s, and they were just planting churches like Johnny Appleseed all over America. And people were, and you had the tent meetings at this time going on, left over from the 1800s, where you had people speaking in tongues and having all kinds of miraculous events. I don't know if you saw the movie about Elvis Presley, but in the beginning, it shows him being part of these Pentecostal churches where they get into these ecstasies and start going, blah, 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 speaking in tongues like you wouldn't never believe. But it wasn't the tongues of the Bible, okay? It was the mental dissociation they made between their brain and their vocal cords that lets out anything. And it can be learned and it can be done. And that's what Elvis Presley was engaged in. And he got a whole new genre of music from that, ecstasy kind of thing where you're dancing and all this stuff. And that's what they were doing, the Pentecostal churches. They were speaking in tongues. They were foaming at the mouth. They were dancing in the aisles like African pygmies, and he's going wild. Okay. And that's where Elvis Presley picked up a lot of this for his music, believe it or not. And so all these Protestant churches are growing like crazy, in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and especially during the Depression where, hey, there wasn't much to live for. And, let me go speak in tongues with these people and get excited about life again. And the church, because of the liberals, is dying on the vine, and let's revive the church. So what vehicle are we going to use? Well, there's this tongues movement in the Protestant churches. And look, we've already come close to the Protestant churches. We've been ecumenical dialogue, early on. And, what else could happen? So this is exactly when you had the friendship start up between guys like Cardinal Sunens is his name, and Oral Roberts, the other guy got caught with a prostitute, Jimmy Swaggart, Billy Graham. There's just a whole line of them that came out of this era. And the Catholics were rubbing shoulders with these guys, Cardinal Sunens, and there's a lot at Notre Dame that were doing that and saying, hey, what can we do together? And somebody says, hey, let's all speak in tongues. And Sunan says, yeah, and I know the proper place to start it all. The main university in the United States for Catholicism. That's Notre Dame. So you had all these people, all these students from Notre Dame come to the Notre Dame stadium, no less. Fill the stadium to the gills, and people start talking in tongues willy-nilly. At least that's what they think they're speaking. And you got all these hundreds, thousands of them speaking in tongues in Notre Dame Stadium all at the same time. And they all think they're being filled by the Holy Spirit. Okay? So that's where it all started. And then it would go to other Catholic universities that were popular. Okay? And before you know, they had a phenomena on their hand. But guess what? About 10 years later, it all died out. Yeah, about 1975. It all died out. And this is what usually happens to somebody who makes up tongue speech. They do it for a while, and it's really exciting. You know, I can't wait to get back to the church to speak in tongues. And then they find out, like we find out with a lot of things, right, that are novel. They look real good at first sight, second sight, third sight, and then all of a sudden we lose taste for it. Because why? Well, here's their biggest complaint. It ain't doing nothing for me. Yep, that's because it ain't real. Okay? They find that out sooner or later. At first, it's like a honeymoon. Nothing can go wrong. You know, and then you hit reality of life. And the tongues aren't taking all these bad things out of my life. As a matter of fact, I think they're getting worse. Yeah, then you reach the reality and you figure out, oh, I'm just making this up. And then you feel foolish. You see. You feel foolish because you've been deluded. So look, if it was a real movement of the Holy Spirit, they would still be speaking in tongues. 60, 70 years later. But you can always tell it's a fake when it dies out of its own accord. So that's all that you'll find in my book on tongues. Okay? I suggest you take a gander at it. All right. Could Neanderthal man be of the line of Cain, kept separate from Seth's line? No. Detective Holmes. Neanderthal man is just made up by the evolutionists. It comes from a place in England, or is that not England? Next to England, somewhere. What, Scotland? Called Neanderthal. It's a city, town named Neanderthal. And that's where the bones were discovered. Okay? So, you think Neanderthal, whoa, that, gives you this kind of archaeological sense that it's really old. No, it's just a city in Scotland. So, there's a whole story about Neanderthal man in my book. What's it called? I forget the title of my own book. Scientific Heresies. Not only Neanderthal man, but Peking man and all the other mans that were being pushed in the late 1800s and early mid-1900s. And our own priest of the Catholic Church, Father Teilhard de Chardin, was involved in the fakery of at least one of these. I think it was Peking man, where they file down the teeth to make sure they fit and, to make it look like this was an authentic skull of Peking man. And it was a fake through and through. And there's like a half a dozen of these so-called, so-and-so men who were to be the proof for the missing link. because they hadn't found the link between ape and man, and all the ones that were propped up were fakes. And they were suspected as fakes when they were propped up, and then later confirmed as fakes, some 20 or so years later. But there's nothing to them, okay? So if there's nothing to them, then you can't start making them part of the line of Cain and Seth, okay? All right. How do you think Peter could betray Christ knowing all he knew? Oh, man, Laura, if we had the answer to that question, I could put it in the bottle, sell it, and be a billionaire overnight. What makes a man do what he does? There's some chapter, verse in Wisdom. Who knows the ways of a man? How can they be calculated? I forget the verse, chapter and verse, but you see, in order for God to know if we really love him, really fear him, really want to serve him, he left us with this little thing after Adam called concupiscence as a punishment, basically, for what Adam did. You and I both have it, as everybody else. And that's that gnawing little voice in your body or head, whatever. It says, come on, man. God's made it too hard for you. One time won't hurt. You want to do it. Blah, 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 blah. Okay? Read what Paul says about that in Romans chapter 7, verse 15 to 20. It says, I do the things I don't want to do. Why? Because my body is sold under sin. That is my flesh. You see, because human beings are two components, spirit and body. The fusion of those two we usually call the soul, okay? Or the mind, or the heart. But the body, my body that you see, has not been saved yet. My soul has been saved. So there's this constant conflict going on with my body, who wants to sin so bad he can taste it, and my soul, which says, don't do it. You'll end up in eternal hell, because that way you won't be holy. And God wants holy people. Constantly, every day, fighting. Okay? That's who we are. And you can thank Adam for that. So, every once in a while, you get weak, because you haven't paid attention to these temptations and you keep just ignoring them, and instead of praying about them and asking for God for grace to deal with them, you just take it for granted. And all of a sudden, man, they grab you and they won't let go, and there you are in a situation. Look at David from the Bible. Paul uses him as an example of someone who lost his justification. Here he is, king of Israel. Couldn't have had it any better. And he was probably fluffing off, He wrote most of the Psalms after he sinned with Bathsheba. But there were a few Psalms before, and, relationship was good with God, and he probably was just thinking he was high and couldn't go any higher. And who could stop him now? Nobody. And sees this woman over there and thinks that, he just got too much pride at that time, and it just happens, He just loses his will, and it just happens. Okay? This is what sin does. entices you, and then, as James says in James chapter 1, it entices you, and then it has its period of gestation, he calls it. You know how long gestation is? It's 9 months in a woman. When she's pregnant, she's gestating for 9 months, and then she has her baby. Well, that's what James says sin is like. It gets a hold in your body, and then it gestates. It just keeps growing and growing and growing. He says, and before you know it, out pops the baby, out pops the sin. That's what he says. Okay? So it's a so there you have it. Okay? Let me go on to another question here. How would you advise someone struggling with doubts? Like, what if you get to heaven and God says, why didn't you become a Muslim or a Jew or join up with Brother Peter, become a real Catholic? Well, you're giving a hypothetical situation there, Mr. Silver, and I don't think I'm going to deal with hypotheticals here. Okay, I can deal with one part of your question, and that is dealing with doubts. Okay, doubt is a common thing. Okay, if you're normal, you're going to go through a period of doubt, probably about an hour per day. Okay, if you're normal. You can pretend you're not having doubts, but you're not facing the reality. Okay, look, you're a human being. You can't see God. The world is going to hell in a handbasket. The church is probably the worst it's ever been in the history of 2,000 years. And, gee, you have a doubt. Is this all real? Am I being deceived? What is it? Does God care? Does Jesus care about the church? Why does he allow this to go on day after day after day after day? And you begin to have doubts. Okay? But if you have the grace of God in you, if you've been going to Mass, getting the sacraments, and you do your prayers and all the other things that are channels for getting the grace of God, the doubts will go away. God will see to it. He will help you in your time of need. But to have them, it's normal. Don't worry about it. All right. Laurie, you're asking too many questions here, so I'm going to have to pass on you. So, Robert, I saw your video with Austin a while ago. Do you still think the Earth is a globe? Yes, I do. So I'm smarter than you. Taylor Marshall, a plant. Not last time I saw him. Can we call Noah a prophet like Muslims? Can we call Noah a prophet like Muslims? I'm not sure what you're asking. Are you saying Muslims are prophets? You didn't write it correctly. What specifically is a prophet in the Old Testament sense? One who prophesied for God about what he was going to do with the people, whether it was a blessing or a judgment. And the people would be forced to, like the judgment issues, like Jonah was a prophet, right? He went to Nineveh, God said he's going to destroy this city in 40 days unless you repent. How did he know that? Because God told him. So the prophet is someone who knows what God's going to do in the future, says it to the people for the purpose of the people repenting of their sin. Fortunately, in this instance, they did repent, and God changed his mind and did not destroy Nineveh. Okay. So That's what a prophet is. Number two, should Catholics go to Mars? I'm sure they won't build a church there. We're having a hard enough time on Earth. Okay? Can you imagine living on Mars where it's not as complementary to human beings as Earth is? No way. You see, they messed it up one time before on Earth, and God brought the global flood. Okay? So he showed us a long time ago how serious he is. And so they messed it up once on Earth, and God had to destroy it. And what happened in the destruction? Well, not only were the people killed, but the whole land was moved here and there and everywhere, and it was just combobulated. Okay? You had mountains rising in odd places, land masses put in odd places. You had the temperature go down. You had the ages of men drop dramatically. You had the animals scattered all over the place. You had fault lines appearing in different places. It was a mess. Okay? And that's what we're living with today. So you can depend upon it that God's not going to give us another planet to live on. Okay? Because we've already messed this one up twice. He'll end the whole universe before he ever gives us another place to go to. All right. Follow the controversy about the Pope writing to preface James Martin's book on Lazarus. I picked up a copy and almost 1/5 through. So far, I have to say it's been good. Huh? I'm not sure I understand what you're saying there, Paul, but are you telling me that Father Martin is not trying to propagate his belief in homosexuality in that book on any page? So if there's just one page where he's promoting homosexuality and not condemning it for the priesthood, it doesn't matter how big or how small the book is. Okay. So not quite sure what you're saying by nothing dodgy, because he doesn't dodge, Father Martin. He just comes right out and says it. Okay, that's one thing that's made him so notorious in the Catholic eye, is his boldness of speech. Okay, so but get to the end, let me know, and I would love to know, because I'm sure not going to read it. I can tell you that. Why do you think so many Catholic scholars struggle to get works correct with justification? Would you ever specifically write a book especially dealing with it? I did. It's called Not by Faith Alone. It was written in 1996, almost 30 years ago. So I did deal with it. And they struggle to get works correct because they have been enamored by Protestant thought. And the ones that are enamored by Protestant thought are the liberals, the liberal Catholics, who were always looking for something new. I mean, the first guy, Catholic priest teaching in Catholic University of America. And by the way, tongues went on in Catholic University of America. That was the next most popular Catholic institution next to Notre Dame. Okay, so they were doing it back at CUA in the 60s, early 70s. And then all of a sudden, just like Notre Dame, it stopped, dead. And all the liberal theologians were out there just hoping this was going to be a revival of the church. and it just fell flat on his face. Anyway, let me go back to where I was. Fitzmyer, Joseph Fitzmyer, professor at Catholic University of America back in the 60s and 70s, wrote a commentary called the Jerome Biblical Commentary with Raymond Brown, Father Raymond Brown. Okay. And who's the other guy? They had three guys. His name is on the tip of my tongue. I just can't get it out. Anyway, I want to show you how liberal these guys were. Okay. Father Brown, notorious Father Brown, used to teach at Union Theological Seminary in New York, a Protestant seminary. Yeah. And one of the worst or most popular liberal Protestant seminaries in the world. This Catholic priest, Father Brown, taught there. So you can imagine it swirling in his head. All you have to do is read the Jerome Biblical Commentary and find out. And his cohort, Father Fitzmyer from Catholic University of America, wrote the commentary on Romans. And in there he says that man is declared justified by God, just like the Protestants say, and that we're forensically imputed with Christ's righteousness. Yep. Okay. Something similar to that. I read that. I just couldn't believe it. And I was writing Not by Faith Alone. I wanted to get some more Catholic perspective. I opened up the Catholic commentary, and I got Protestant commentary. So that's part of the problem. And, Luther struggled with this thing in Romans 3:28 that he just never got by. Which is a man is justified by faith apart from works of the law. And just could never reconcile that with James saying in 2:24, a man is justified by works and not by faith alone. Just couldn't get by it. Okay? And the reason why is because he put all the burden on faith to make the distinction. And it ain't going to work that way. He kept saying that, well, we don't need to add works to faith because if you have good faith, then that faith alone can justify you. That's what Paul means. So instead of saying that the works also justify, Luther would say the best the works can do is qualify my faith so that I have good faith, and that good faith alone will justify me. You see, this is the way he was trying to work it. Or some other Protestants would say that, well, the only way works can get into the equation is if you say that the works are the fruits of my faith. So again, you have to have good faith. And what's going to come from good faith? Well, good works. So works are only, again, a qualifier. They're not an act of justification themselves. Only faith can be. And a lot of Catholics like that idea, especially those that came out of the 60s and 70s, where they wanted to throw away everything. They didn't like Aquinas anymore. They didn't like the tradition anymore. We need to start from square one. We need to join the world and speak the world's language. And, maybe we'll find a reason why all this Protestantism started, if we start re-looking at all the Catholic dogmas. This is throw the apple cart upside down. A perfect nihilist, and somehow out of that's going to come something organized and we can hang our hat on. That was their idea. Okay. And they were dead wrong, of course. I mean, Trent, Council of Trent, was the best council we ever had. And it took on this justification issue like you would not believe. They came out with 33 canons, and there were so many canons, usually 3 times as much as any other issue that they tackled, because they looked at every wrinkle of this controversy. And at the end of it, condemned almost everything Martin Luther said. Because if you get one thing wrong, you're going to get it all wrong. If you think Christ's righteousness is imputed to you and you're not infused with faith, hope, and love at the beginning, and that's why you're justified, you're going to get everything else wrong. Okay? Because it's got to fit together like a puzzle. So, but you got Fitzmyer, one of the leading theologians in Catholicism at the time, agreeing more with Luther than he was his own Catholic Church. But what do you think that's going to breed? It's going to breed all kinds of other liberals, and they're all there right now teaching in the universities. Okay? Who knows what they're saying now? And if you take one look at the new commentary that came out, the new Jerome commentary, it's even worse than it was with Fitzmyer. Okay? So, man, I just shudder at the times to come. I really do. Joe says, why not put out your video with and without music on the justification so that it will be out there? Yeah, the music is a pain in you know what anyway. So I'm just going to put it out there without the music. Just give me a day or two. I'll get it out there. You'll love it. Okay, so it's 5 o'clock. You got to go. I see you're more. Okay. See you next week at what? June the 12th. So that's next Wednesday, 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. Please go visit our website. I want to remind you also of is a plan to try to get these Bible commentaries into the seminaries, Catholic seminaries, into their libraries, so they at least have the information. And so I'm asking people to sponsor the 4-volume commentary for at least one seminary of your choice. And I don't know how many seminaries there are in the United States. But I'm trying to hit all of them. We also have a program where we're trying to get the book Supersessionism is Irrevocable out to all the bishops of the world. So the next time this issue comes up, they're educated about, whether the Jews have their own covenant or not and all this stuff. So we're trying both of those. And so visit our website. I think Lawrence posted it on the website if you'd like to sponsor. Somebody came in requesting to be a sponsor of this already today. And I appreciate that, James. Thank you so much. I'll get back to you on that in a day or two. So anyway, we'll see you next week. God bless you and keep you. And I hope I have helped you in your walk with the Lord today, and that you have grown closer to Him. That is my purpose.